Music Talk.
Hi, I'm Leon Hill. I'm here with two of my co-pilots, co-producers, Rachel and Mia. Say hello.
Hi.
Hey.
Welcome to the first Music Talks podcast. Over the coming weeks and months, you'll hear me in conversation with some of the most interesting and fascinating faces in the music business. Catch us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and find out what's coming next by following us on social media. Details after the show. Welcome to the first Music Talks podcast. As this is probably the first time we have met, we, that's me, Rachel, Mia, no guests this week, thought we should take some time out to tell you a little bit about who we are, what qualifies us to take you on this ride through the land of dreams and make-believe that is, or sometimes can be, the music industry. Now for me, this journey started a long, long time ago. Not in a galaxy far, far away, that's another story that's already been told. Born and raised in London, in the UK, which is where this show is recorded and based, I always had one foot in the industry. My dad is old school industry, and as young kids, me and my sisters were brought up in and around musicians, studios, gigs, and music was always played in the house. I took a much bigger interest in my dad's record collection, huge stacks of vinyl. He was bringing stuff home every week, whether it was from work, whether it was stuff that he was buying. So he had pretty much everything from every genre. Roxy Music, Angel Eyes, Burning Spear, Dylan, Sam Cooke, Howling Wolf, all sorts of stuff. It was a fantastic collection, classic vinyl. You know, the stuff you really want to cut your teeth on. And you know, that was what whet my appetite for what I'm doing today and have been doing for the last 10, 20, 30, my God. And yeah, you know, let's not forget, this was the early 80s. So if you knew where to look and listen, you were already dialed in to that little-known niche sound blowing up out of New York City that people were calling hip-hop. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. And that was it, really. The touch paper was lit. Didn't look back. I developed that taste through school. You know, in those days it was hard to... It wasn't easy to find. You know, this wasn't music you were hearing on the radio. You had to seek it out. In fact, I think at the time there was one radio show that was playing that kind of music, and that was like midnight on a Friday till 2 a.m. So it was all about hip hop. You know, through the early 80s, through to the mid 80s, and then I guess by the time I left school at 16 years old, it was just as we were starting to hit that big acid house, outdoor party, rave culture, all kicking off. Tracks like Future, acid tracks, some of the big defining sounds of the time. Outdoor parties, unlicensed raves, hooking up with convoys after the pub, driving to God knows where and finding a sound system in the middle of the woods is what it was all about. So from there, like everybody else of my age that was into that kind of music, into that scene, it wasn't long before there was a mixer and a pair of 1210s in the house.
Yeah, what are 1210s, Leon?
What are 1210s, Rachel? I'll tell you what 1210s are. Technics 1200s were and still are the vinyl record players for DJs. Super heavy, indestructible, and synonymous with the rise of dance music around the world. You know, this was really the sort of the scene that was going on back then. You know, it was all about, you know, that DIY ethic that we're all hearing about today. You know, you don't need a record label, you can do it all yourself. Well, listen, let me tell you where it started. That's exactly where it started. You know, there was people like me, people like my friends, my crew. You know, we got the sound system, we got our turntables, we put our records in the back of a fucking car. You know, and there's your party, and they were parties. You know. So, yeah, these were great days. You know, it was a lot of fun. You had some real big characters, your Fabios, your Groove Riders, that were really sort of driving the music. You know, and what, those guys end up with a Radio 1 show?
Yeah, One in the Jungle.
So there you go.
I used to produce it, by the way.
Shout out to Fabio and Groove Rider.
Absolutely.
So, at this time, you know, and again, late 80s, early 90s now, moving forward a little bit, it was a short step from collecting vinyl to play at home, to playing them at outdoor parties and clubs. And this is what everyone did. And so, you know, if you can imagine, you know, the sort of freedom that you have to do something like that, the ability to go and just have a party somewhere, pop up in a field, pop up in some woods somewhere, you know, it was great. Everybody loved it, and everybody started to do it. And I remember I went on holiday one year, and I came back, and before I'd left, and this was only like a 2-week summer holiday, before I'd left, nothing, tumbleweed. I come back, everybody's wearing smiley T-shirts, they've got bandanas on, and fucking dungarees and stuff, and that was it. It had gone mainstream. And on the one hand, That's great. It's lovely to share these things with other people and get more people involved. But the flip side of that coin is, you just start to piss more people off. Farmers don't want parties going on in their field. Councils don't want to be clearing up after people, coning roads off into one lane because everyone's just parked wherever they can because the party's just over there. So the government soon closed the door on these parties. Legislation was introduced that stopped the parties in their tracks, effectively. You could have equipment seized just on suspicion that you were going to cause a breach of the peace. If you're a party, and it was, what was the term they used? Repetitive beats. So if you were playing repetitive beats, and that could be from your car, boom, 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 typical 4 to the floor stuff, in your car, in a part, you could have your gear impounded. And that was it. That shut down parties pretty much overnight. It gave police the tools that they needed to seize your gear, and if you ain't got any gear, you ain't having a party. That combined with what was going on with the traveller communities in England at the time, who would just sort of pitch up and live in a field or live in on a piece of wasteland, rural England was slowly being sealed off. So you couldn't get to these places to have the parties anymore. You couldn't get to those fields. You couldn't go to those forests. You know what? You couldn't even pull over off the road. So having gone from this very open, very free, great environment to be creative, to listen to your music, to party with your friends, it was slowly sort of shut down and everybody started getting channeled into clubs.
So it's basically the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act after Castle Morton, wasn't it? That really changed everything for ravers at the time.
That's correct. And listen, Castle Morton, let's talk about that for a moment. I remember Castle Morton. That was the first summer. I was living in Ibiza that summer. And I remember we got this is pre-internet. There was no sort of going online. And the only way that we found out about it was some old beat-up tabloid newspaper. And we picked it up. And I'm looking at these pictures and I'm thinking, holy fuck. There's aerial photographs of fucking thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And that was something that went over the space of a weekend. And if you can imagine, when you got something like that going on, there were no mobile phones, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there wasn't suddenly, first of all, there's 2 people, and then 15 minutes later, there's 1,000 people. So it was much slower for information to filter out. But my God, information filtered out. And so over the course of that weekend, you just had thousands of people converging, more of them turning up, more, and this thing got bigger and bigger and bigger. And really, as Rachel says, that was the thing that prompted the government to act. And that was really the catalyst that brought that legislation in that just squashed things like that, stopped those parties from ever being able to happen again. So it was interesting times. It was a lot of fun. A lot of parties were being busted. And again, like other people, it wasn't a huge leap from having turntables at home and playing music at home to DJing at parties to promoting your own parties, which is kind of what I went on to do. Well, not kind of, it is what I went on to do.
So what were you playing at your parties then, Leon?
Well, we found a lovely little venue, little wooden hut, held about 250 people, middle of nowhere, surrounded by reservoirs. So we could have 250 people in the place, we could have 500 people outside, we could pull some of the PA outside, and we were having good pumping parties. What were we playing? All acid house stuff. There was a lot of minimal techno coming out of Detroit. You had 808 State, Primal Scream, doing some of that Balearic stuff. Frankie Knuckles, Bizarre Inc. playing with knives, huge. Prodigy, they're in the news for all the wrong reasons at the moment. Shout out to Prodigy, Rip Keith. But, this is when they were starting out. No one knew who they were. But my God, their tracks, insane. So this was all the kind of stuff that we were listening to. We were playing it in fields, playing it in clubs. The music was great. It was very exciting. It was very inspiring, and it inspired a generation. And one of the best things at this time was this was an English thing. It wasn't happening anywhere else. America didn't get it. America didn't get it for 10, 15, 20 years later. By which stage we'd evolved through acid house, garage, jungle, drum and bass. All the hard work creatively was done in my mind.
So you were in Ibiza and 808's tracks, Frankie Knuckles, tracks like that were just massive. And they were hitting the UK charts. Things were going in top 10. It was become much more mainstream, more commercial. So what were you doing in Ibiza? What happened then?
Well, at the time, Ibiza. Well, I guess it still is, but back then it was fresh, it was new. The only people in Ibiza then were hippies, hippies and rich Spanish people who just used it as a bit of a playground to listen to music and get high and dance around naked. So, we used to take our operation out there in May, and we'd stay there until October. And you had a lot of people from the UK scene that were doing exactly that. Danny Rampling. He was a big name on the island at the time.
Paul Oakenfold, he was there.
Oakie, all of those guys, So Ibiza was where the scene went to in the summer, and so we would live there, and it was a lot of fun. And it's very easy to sort of get carried away, and one thing leads to another, and you sometimes find yourself getting into a little bit of trouble, and yeah, but they were great days. There was a lot of good music.
Do you want to tell us what happened, Leon?
A lot of good drugs. Okay. Let's just leave it at that.
Okay.
And,
but what happened to you in these parties? They sound amazing. I wish I was there.
Let me tell you about a really interesting one. So after about a year of doing outdoor, unlicensed, illegal, whatever you want to call them, raves, I built up a little bit of cash. There was a bit of money in the bank. And I thought, right, you know what? This is the time to do my Castle Morton, to put all of this money into one huge big party. And then, I can go to Barbados for a month and buy a new BMW and all those things that I think, are really cool. Or at the time when I was 19,
they're
thought
still
were really cool.
Barbados and BMWs are still cool.
I still drive a BMW. So we tried to put on a big one. But unfortunately we got busted. We got shut down by the police as we were setting it up. So they impounded, we had 2 articulated lorries full of PA, we had another one full of lighting, staging, toilets, funfair rides, lasers, yada, 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 yada. All of it impounded by the police. Ooh. Everybody arrested. We had, and remember that this is back in the day before mobile phones, okay? So when you were organising a party like this, you didn't put the address up because it was illegal. You get shut down. So everybody went to a meeting point. You had a telephone number that you would phone at round about 11 o'clock, midnight. Then you'd get the address over the phone. And you know what? You were phoning from a phone box.
And these meeting points were always on the motorways, weren't they? Remember Heston Services?
Heston Services on the
Classic.
M4. That was a big one. That was one everyone used. We used that. And in fact, on the night of that party, because we couldn't communicate with people, it was, we were getting shut down, and we just think, fuck, man, everyone's going to be heading to these points. We can't, there's nothing we can do, we just got to let this play out. So yeah, Heston Services was one of the spots. It was so full that both sides of the service station on the M4, the M4 is a big motorway, big highway in the UK, cars were overflowing back onto the road. So the police had to cone this 3-lane highway off into 1 lane. They had to manage this overflow of traffic that was coming out on both sides. We had a similar situation at Soho Square, bang in the middle of London, central London. Soho Square rammed. Traffic backing out, spilling out of the square, starting to create gridlock around Trafalgar Square. It was crazy.
So in the meantime, your party had been shut down already.
In the meantime,
couldn't
yep.
let people know, because in those days there was no mobiles. I think the younger generation listening probably find that quite hard.
I think
to believe.
Yeah, it was really difficult. So yeah, whilst all of these people are meeting up and getting ready to party, whatever that entails. I was being interviewed by the Chief Constable of Surrey Police. Everybody, the sound guys, the lighting guys, they'd all been arrested. They were all sitting in cells. I couldn't get to a phone. I'd been secured by the police. So we just had to let it play out. And I think the first chance I got to speak to someone was probably about 11 o'clock that night. And the poor guy, I mean, he knew the party was off, but as soon as he jumped in his car to drive away, everyone else jumps in their car to follow him. So he's trying to drive home, knowing there's not a party going on. Everybody behind him thinking, this is the guy that, don't lose him. He knows where the party is.
Because that's what it was all about, convoys, wasn't it? It was following that convoy, getting to that party.
That's right.
Because you had done some successful parties before this. So people knew.
Yeah.
And so this is the exit. So then what happened? Is that when you went to Ibiza, or had you already come back?
To cut a long story short, The police didn't believe that this was all the work of a little 19-year-old. You know, they thought I'd been put up to it by drug dealers and gangsters, and these nasty men with horrible dogs and da-da-da-da-da-da. You know, we know you're scared. We know that they're intimidating you. And I'm thinking, fucking hell, I might get away with this. And I did. And I walked away with it. I wasn't charged with anything. They tried to fine me nearly £30,000 for police time because, they spent a lot of time and effort policing the busting, helicopters, all sorts of things. None of that's cheap. And I walked away with it. And then after that, it was, summers in Ibiza. And, I had a bad summer in Ibiza one year. And I thought, man, there's got to be an easier way to do this. There's got to be an easier way.
So what happened next?
Well, after getting busted and equipment impounded and narrowly avoiding a huge fine, I thought, you know what? This is a good time to get your head down and return to academia.
Back to school?
Back to school. Fast forward through college, university, law school. 7 years later, and with a big chunk of debt, I came out the other end a fresh-faced, eager beaver lawyer.
So you could now finally get yourself out of trouble, Leon.
Kind of, but not really. I think it's safe to say that those days of rabble-rousing, promoting illegal parties were pretty much behind me by the time I was spat out of law school. I soon found myself working within the legal profession, nothing to do with music. Initially, I was suing the police, suing prison officers.
That must have felt quite good after your raving days.
I'm telling you, it felt pretty damn fantastic. Yeah, there's nothing like showing a policeman up to be a liar, standing in front of a judge and a jury. That's always going to be a winner.
So then how did you get into music law, Leon, from there?
Spoke to my bosses and they let me start developing a completely new client base for the firm, based around sort of people in the creative industries, designers, fashion designers, product designers, musicians, artists.
They were quite a cool firm then to let you do that.
They were fantastic.
And what year was this then? What kind of time?
This would have been, I guess, 2002-ish, 2003, something round about there.
So the internet was possibly just beginning to become part of our lives.
Yeah. The internet was becoming part of our lives in a big way. There was no reason for me to go anywhere. But I got approached with an offer from Universal.
What do you mean, Universal Music, like the record company, or?
Yeah, Universal Music Group International.
UMG. I think that's something our listeners would like to hear more about. So now, as we all know, Universal Music, one of the big three. You've got Universal, Sony and Warner's. At that time, there was not just the three majors. There was still a lot of major record companies in action, wasn't there? Well, but Universal was still one of the biggest ones, would you say?
Well, for a start, you had EMI back then, which had been swallowed up by Universal. The landscape wasn't hugely different to what it is at the moment. It was much more of a major labels market.
Yeah. So were you approached by Universal to become their lawyer for them as an in-house lawyer, or? Yeah,
it was working, and it was in a legal capacity, part of the business and legal affairs team at Universal. It was based in their office in London, and it was a great time to be in that role or in any legal role at a major label. You've got to remember that at the time the industry was crashing down around online file sharing. Napster, Pirate Bay, LimeWire all ruled the waves at the time.
Can you just give a quick overview to our listeners of exactly what Napster was? Just a quick.
What was Napster?
I know.
Napster single-handedly devastated the music industry as it was back then. Napster was the first peer-to-peer online file sharing platform. And so what that did was, if you don't know what peer-to-peer file sharing is very quickly, that enabled people to transfer files between each other very quickly, very easy, at very high volume.
It was the template, wasn't it, of what we have today? And it was Sean Fanning and Sean Parker, two guys at college together who came up with this concept. talk about it a lot in my lessons.
Listen,
it's fascinating.
it's exactly the same technology that sits behind
Yep.
Spotify.
Mm.
You know, Spotify is a peer-to-peer streaming
Yeah.
service.
They
The only difference is on Napster you were downloading instead of streaming, but it was all run peer-to-peer. So, you know, a lot of that technology was the same. And then from Napster, you know, and if you want to find out more about this, just Google that. In fact, just Google Napster, Metallica, and you'll see one of the biggest sort of screw-ups, or like how not to deal with piracy from Lars and the guys in the band. But I think they've learnt a lesson, and I think they've actually come out of it better for it. But if you want to find more about it, Google Napster, Google Metallica.
Alex Winter just came out with a documentary called Downloaded, which rehashes the Napster
Sure,
saga.
yeah.
We have a comment from one of our producers, Ricky Camilleri, saying, does Lars regret the way in which he handled Napster back in the day? It said the music industry has lost billions not harnessing the power of tech between, during, and after Napster.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, the whole Napster thing definitely, you know, it didn't do us any favors whatsoever. But you know what? We're still in the right on that. We're still right about Napster, no matter, you know, who's out there who say, you know, Metallica was wrong. All you have to do is look at the state of the music industry.
And we're like, well, hang on, it's not about money. It's about control.
But
whose choice should it be? We were saying it should be our choice. If we want to give our stuff away, we'll give our stuff away. I mean, that's a no-brainer.
So yeah, from Napster, you then had services like LimeWire, you had services like Pirate Bay that's still sloshing about out there now. And between them, you know, we've got to a stage in the music business where revenues are tanked by up to 95% in some instances.
What do you mean by tanked by 95%?
Well, take a label whose revenues are at 100% and take away 95% of it. So they'd lost 95% of their business.
And we're talking major record companies here, because the younger generation are very much DIY. And at this time, you know, because the internet was so new, DIY didn't really exist, did it?
There was
that's the point to make here. Majors did run the music industry.
Absolutely, there was no DIY. But you know, these are the times of 5-album deals. You know, you'd get signed to a label, and they'd sign you for a huge chunk of cash. Here, here's a big advance. You know, we'll look after you for 3, 4, 5 albums. So, you know, back in the day, if you wanted to get a song in the chart, there was no X Factor. You know, if you wanted to get a song in the charts, you needed a record deal, and so, you know, labels pretty much sort of ran things in that respect. So to suddenly find, like, hey, well, hang on a minute, what? No one's paying for music anymore. What? We're not making any money. You know, that was a huge change, and in a lot of respects, there was a lot of confusion. You know, it's like, what are these services?
Yeah, majors wanted to shut that down, didn't they? They were not going to let that happen. And the big case in America was the RIAA shutting them and suing Napster.
Yep.
So they were, you know, where they set up the template for peer-to-peer sharing and what we see today in Spotify. They were shut down and they were sued, weren't they? Millions. They lost everything.
But yeah, I mean, even so, you know, these things that once they're out in the wild, they're very, very difficult to shut down, as they've subsequently found out with Pirate Bay. You know, so yeah, there were huge efforts to try and stem the flow. You know, turn the tanker around. You know, this was something that record labels should have seen coming. You know, this isn't something you should have got caught by surprise, but they did. And by the time they realised how devastating the loss in revenues were, it was really too late. You know, you suddenly had a new generation of music consumers that expected music for free and had no shortage of places to find it. You know, it was a tough time. We went from doing deals at Universal, from being super busy, queue of people outside in your door, wanting to sell ringtones, wanting to do downloads, da-da. Suddenly nothing. No one knocking at the door. Just tumbleweed. And that was pretty much overnight, you know, and that really, you know, that was the point at which it's like, right, that's it, you know. We've got no one coming to us asking to sell our music. Okay, we've got all of our traditional revenues drying up. People aren't buying music. So it was up to us to go out and find the business. And get this, right? if you can believe this, and we're talking sort of 2007-ish, I guess, so sort of towards the end of the noughties, there was no such thing as business development in any record label. There was nobody going out and finding the deals. There was no one developing new products. It was all reactive. Lay back. You're sitting in your chair at your office. The phone will always ring. Somebody's always going to want your music. There'll always be a knock at the door. They're always going to want that deal. And so when that goes, you don't have people that are trained in sales or trained to sell those products or trained to look at those products and think, do you know what, how can we repackage this? How can we commoditize this differently so that we're not selling to consumer or not trying to sell to consumers that are getting their music elsewhere? Where is a market that still has value? These people didn't exist. So it was down to us. And it was up to, well, at Universal at the time, there were 3 of us. And we were pushed front and centre to go out and find new ways to license catalogue, to knock on doors and to drum up new business, to look at how music was being consumed. If people weren't paying for music, how could we develop new revenue streams? And we did that by looking primarily at, rather than going, D2C, direct to consumer, looking at what B2B, what business to business deals we could be doing. Listen, we need money coming in. So if kids ain't paying for music, who is paying for music? Marketing budgets. Let's look at how we can help sell or market your product or service by attaching it to music. And by doing that, we can access marketing budgets. So these deals weren't small. These deals typically were multi-million euro deals. But instead of getting your revenues from selling CDs and albums and everything else in a record store, we were getting our revenues from selling our music to mobile phone companies who wanted to launch a music-based mobile phone tariff, for example. And so we went on to do that. And we did it with mobile phones. We did it with bank accounts. We travelled all over Europe, all over the world, putting these deals together and unlocking big marketing budgets.
I'm not sure I'm quite following here, Leon. So what was going on? So the internet had changed the way consumers consume music. It changed everything for you at the record companies. There was a bit of panic, basically. So what happened next? Come on, what's this all about?
Well, I guess what this is, it's all the sort of build up to where we are today, because all of these things link in, as they always do. So we've got, we've got this background. We've got a generation of people that expect music for nothing. Music's being consumed, but it's being consumed for free. Major record labels, they've got a big oil tanker to turn around. It ain't going to happen overnight. So in the meantime, we're scrabbling around trying to release as much new revenue or develop new revenue streams as we can. Now, off the back of that, with all of this going on in the background, and this was our world for 2, 3, 4 years, there was a young Swedish guy turned up at our London office and had this wacky idea of how to stem the flow of illegal downloads and restore revenues.
What, make money? No, he was mad because this Napster was running things. So, who was this guy? Come on, tell us. Surely you laughed him out the building.
Well, not quite. It was Daniel Ek.
So, who's Daniel Ek?
Come on, chill. Founder and CEO of Spotify.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so yeah, it's not accurate to say that he was laughed out the building. Yes, it was sounding very similar to some of those pirate or non-licensed sites. And it's probably accurate to say that at first people didn't get it at all. A free, peer-to-peer, obviously very dirty words at the time, ad-funded streaming audio service. But the thing was, if I recall, this was as much about piracy in the way that it was being pitched as it was about turning the tanker around and breaking open those revenues again. It was about helping labels and rights holders transition away from piracy, illegal consumption, and potentially stem that tide. And in doing so, transition people over to a new service that's, yes, ad-funded and inverted commas free, but then from there you shuffle them over and you turn them into paying subscribers.
So, the world was seeing this at the time, Leon, as illegal. There were all these court cases going on. There was the Metallica issue with So how did you then think that this was actually going to be real, genuine, like with Spotify? What changed it? So you were in your legal headspace, you were at Universal. What did you think?
Well, so, I mean, you've got this guy who's coming in and saying, yeah, we're going to launch a music service. It will be free. Well, usually the conversation stops there.
Right.
Because music ain't free. Music's got value. We expect people to pay for it. So when somebody says free, a lot of doors were slammed in his face straight away.
So what did you think at that point?
Well, I mean, what he was really talking about was, it's free to the consumer, but your costs as a label are being covered by advertising. Another big selling point for Spotify and subsequently all the services that have come in their wake was if you were getting your music from an illegal peer-to-peer service, you didn't know what you were getting. So Spotify were offering a much better user experience. Your user experience as a pirate meant you were frequently downloading viruses onto your machine, incomplete or poor quality tracks. You had to store them. Once you've downloaded it, you've got to put it somewhere. So you've got your drive filling up on your laptop. You've got external drives. You've got to make sure that your media player of choice has all the right codecs you need to actually play the track you've downloaded. On the one hand, it was free, but on the other hand, wasn't the best user experience. This was another front that Spotify were attacking on. They were offering free service. You weren't paying for something that you can get for free elsewhere. It was legal, it was licensed, and it had a far better user experience. The ability to search across all repertoire and catalogue, high quality recordings. You don't need to download or store anything. This suddenly became, and this is another dynamic that changed. We moved from acquisition to access. It wasn't about buying and owning and storing, downloading, big shelf full of vinyl. It wasn't about that anymore. It was about being able to access everything, anywhere, because it was being streamed.
What made you think this could work?
Well, we've got nothing to lose. When 95% of your revenues or thereabouts is disappearing, you'll cling to anything. And so this was, from our point of view, it was like, well, why not? Let's try it. Let's see if it works. I think sort of pretty soon Sony came on board with a similar attitude, and I think only Warner's were the big holdout. They didn't get it for a while, but they did eventually. So
was that a lot of head down and doing lots of contracts? Was it quite exciting time for you from a legal perspective of writing new stuff, or was it quite straightforward? Or is that for another podcast?
Writing contracts is never exciting.
Oh, for maybe some of our, future entrepreneurs listening in, they might find it exciting.
We'll talk about more of this in an upcoming episode of Music Talks, where S is for streaming.
Nice. I mean, there's people that are in the industry that are talking about maybe perhaps the decline of Spotify as they're not making profits. So, I mean, this is another further conversation to do on the S podcast for streaming. But
I think on S for streaming, we're certainly going to look at who the main players are in the streaming game at the moment. We're certainly going to have conversations about who's the best, who's the worst, who's going to last the longest. Is it going to be a market that has a single dominant player, as we saw with downloads with the iTunes store? When iTunes were selling downloads, they were the only people around the world selling music. That was the only place that was generating music revenues. So are we going to see that again? And is that dominant player going to be Spotify? Is it going to be Apple? Is it going to be somebody else? For sure. Yeah, we're going to look at that.
Excellent.
So that was it. It was the real sort of changing point. And then from there, we started to see revenue slowly climb. We saw the tail off of physical. We saw the tail off of digital downloads. But even so, after 8 or 9 years at Universal, I decided it was time to move on.
So let's start to wrap this up. Who else can we expect to hear from you on Music Talks, Leon? Have you got any other guests lined up?
Yeah, we've got some very, very interesting guests. We've got label heads, we've got senior execs, movers, shakers, disruptors, artists, DJs, creators, streaming services, aggregators, lawyers, accountants, A&R, blah, blah, blah. Basically, anybody that has a foot in the industry from whatever direction and who we find interesting, we will be talking to. And yes, there might be a lot of opinion and plenty of not taking ourselves too seriously, but I guarantee you will learn something from every show. And who should listen? Well, if you're interested in music, you should be subscribing right now.
Okay, Leon, that's great. Thank you. I think it's time for us to call it a day here on episode 1, Music Talks. It's been great.
It's been fantastic. We bust our cherry. It's time to say goodbye.
See you next time.
We'll see you next time.
Music Talks.
Well, not quite goodbye. So now you know a little bit about who we are and what we're doing. Why not subscribe and be sure to get your ears around the upcoming episodes. Every episode has an accompanying Spotify playlist with the tracks and artists we name check on the show, as well as anything else our guests are vibing off. Search Spotify for Music Talks Podcast. If you want to know what's up and who's coming, lock on to Twitter at Hello Music Talks. Get eyes on our Instagram, Hello Music Talk. And if you want to get really friendly, why not email us at hellomusictalks@gmail.com. And FYI, we're a Facebook-free zone. And much as we love producing these shows for you, we do have costs. Like you, we have rent to pay, and hey, baby needs new shoes, right? Help us to keep advert-free and independent by showing us you care. Search for Music Talks Podcast over at Patreon. A small monthly pledge gets rewards for everybody, such as bonus content, access to the Music Talks download archive, exclusive merchandise, and special offers that we will sometimes run in conjunction with our guests. Now, Episode 2 is live. Get on it and hear what Annabella Coldrick, Chief Executive of the Music Managers Forum, has to say when we met her here in London. And stand by for Episode 3, when we talk to one of the best lawyers in the digital music space, bar none, the incredible Gregor Pryor. And finally, a big thank you to Rachel and Mia, production powerhouses and strong women in the industry, and to Brutal Deluxe, who produced our theme and audio. Awesome. And of course, you, the listener. I'm Leon Hill. This has been a Music Talks production. Until next time.